The town square baked under a sun that offered no mercy. It smelled of hot dust and hotter judgment, a thick, gritty scent that got in your teeth. Folks gathered in the shade of the general store, their whispers sharp as broken glass. They were vultures in bonnets and worn-out hats, hungry for a scandal to chew on. And at the center of it all, there she was. Her name was Alara, but no one used it. She was just the woman, barefoot, wrists rubbed raw by a rope that hung loose, but felt tight as a noose. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, clinging to her like a second skin of shame. The sheriff cleared his throat. His voice wasn't cruel, just tired. A voice that had seen too much and stopped caring. He read the sentence from a crumpled piece of paper. For striking a man of standing, a man named Jebediah Thorne, she was to be banished. Not to a cell, no, that was too clean. Her punishment was service. She was to be sent up the ridge, to the cabin of the mountain man, the hermit. The beast folks whispered about when their children wouldn't sleep. Someone in the crowd muttered he was a man who could tame wildfire with a stare. Alara looked up then. The sun caught the deep purple brand on her cheek, a fresh bruise that mapped out her crime. She said nothing. Her silence was louder than any scream. They gave her a sack of flour, a tin of salt, and a sad-looking mule. They pointed toward the hazy peaks that clawed at the sky, and she walked. She walked away from their burning eyes, disappearing into the shimmering heat until she was just a speck. A ghost swallowed by the wilderness. The sheriff spat in the dust. The show was over. The trail was a liar. It started off easy, winding through wheat fields, but soon it turned mean. It climbed, all rock and spiteful pine, a stairway to nowhere. The sun was a hammer on her back. Every breath was a gasp of hot air. Sweat and tears carved clean paths through the grime on her face. The bruises beneath her dress throbbed with each step, a steady, miserable drumbeat. The mule's hooves on the stone sounded like a clock, ticking away what was left of her life. The world was just the buzz of cicadas and the dry caw of crows laughing from dead branches. She just kept walking. What other choice was there? By dusk, just when she thought her legs would give out, she saw it. A thin gray ribbon of smoke, curling into the twilight sky. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The cabin was less a home and more a wound in the side of the mountain. It hunkered down, half swallowed by shadow and trees. The logs were thick as a man's chest, the roof patched with dark moss. She stopped at the broken fence line, her whole body trembling. She stared at the door, a dark rectangle of dread, and waited for it to open and swallow her whole. And then, it did. He wasn't a man. He was a storm cloud filling the doorway. Tall, impossibly broad, with arms scarred and burned dark by the sun. His hair was long and wild, his beard a tangled mess that caught the firelight from inside. He didn't look at her with curiosity, or pity, or anger. He just looked, measuring her, weighing her worth. She tried to speak her name, but the wind stole the word from her lips. He gave a single, slow nod, and stepped aside. The inside of the cabin smelled of pine sap, old smoke, and something metallic, like blood. She stayed by the door, clutching her flour sack like a shield. "You cook," he said. His voice was a low rumble, like rocks grinding together deep underground. A voice made for silence. She managed a nod. "Then cook," he said, and turned his back on her. He sat by a small, grimy window and started sharpening a long, wicked-looking knife. The scrape of steel on stone was the only sound. Her hands shook so badly she could barely strike a match. The stove flared to life with a hungry hiss. Sweat dripped down her spine, cold and hot at the same time. This was her new life. A cage made of logs, with a monster for a keeper. The flour clumped in the water. The bread she tried to make was a flat, doughy disaster. The bit of salted meat she found turned to charcoal in the pan. The smell of her failure filled the tiny cabin, bitter and black. He never said a word. When she finally scraped the burnt offering onto a plate, he took it. He ate about half, chewing slowly, his eyes fixed on something far beyond the cabin wall. He pushed the plate away, stood up, and walked out into the night. She sat alone at the rough-hewn table, staring at the burnt crusts. She refused to cry. Tears were a weakness she couldn't afford. Night fell on the mountain like a stone. The wind moaned through the cracks in the logs, carrying the distant howl of a wolf. She lay on a thin cot in the corner, every muscle aching. She listened to him moving around outside, the rhythmic thud of an axe splitting wood, the creak of a water pump. There was something in those sounds, not comfort, not yet, but something steady, something that wasn't the town's whispering or Jebediah's fists. It was the first time in a long time she hadn't felt like she was about to be broken. She didn't understand it. Not yet. The days started to blur together, each one the same as the last. Quiet. Empty. She'd rise before the sun, her breath misting in the cold mountain air. She'd fetch water from a creek that ran so cold it made her teeth ache. She learned which plants were safe to eat, which herbs could make the tough meat taste a little better. Every meal was a battle. Every silence was a test. He never spoke. He never thanked her. He never complained. He would just eat what she made, his face a mask of stone. Sometimes she'd catch her reflection in the side of the dented kettle. The woman staring back was a stranger. Cheeks hollowed out, eyes wide and haunted, but with a stubborn spark in them that refused to die. The mountain was stripping her down to nothing, or maybe it was revealing what was underneath all along. One morning, her hand slipped. The iron skillet she was pulling from the fire tipped, and searing grease splashed across her wrist. She bit down hard on her lip to keep from screaming, the pain a white-hot flash. But he was there. He moved faster than she thought a man his size could move. Before she could even react, he had her wrist in his hand. His grip was surprisingly gentle. His thumb, rough and calloused, brushed against the blistering skin. He didn't say a word. He just dipped a rag in the cool water bucket, wrapped it carefully around her burned hand, and tied it off. His fingers were deft, sure. For just a second, their eyes met. His weren't the eyes of a beast. They were just sad. Deeply, achingly sad. The moment stretched, longer than a whole day. Then he let go of her wrist and turned away, leaving the scent of pine and sweat lingering in the air. That night, she dreamed of cool water and gentle rain. She dreamed she was finally clean. By the time the full heat of summer arrived, the air was thick with it, heavy and buzzing with gnats. A rhythm had settled over the cabin, a silent understanding. She learned the cadence of his days, the slow, patient way he worked, mending fences, tanning hides, chopping wood. He had a habit of whistling under his breath when he worked, a low, mournful tune she'd never heard before. She started leaving a fresh biscuit on the stump near his woodpile in the mornings. He started leaving a single wildflower on the porch rail where she sat to peel potatoes in the afternoon. Neither of them ever acknowledged the gifts. It was a language without words, a conversation held in the silence. The mountain listened. The mountain understood. Then, one noon, a rider appeared. He came up the trail fast, dust pluming behind his horse like a warning. He was young, freckled, with an easy smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His name was Eli. He brought supplies from town: salt, mail, and a sack full of gossip. His eyes swept over Alara, a slow, insolent appraisal. He laughed, a soft, mean sound. "Well, I'll be. They really sent you up here to the monster's den?" Alara kept her face blank, her hands busy with a bowl of beans. Eli turned his smile on the mountain man, who was carving a piece of wood on the porch steps. "Town folk are taking bets on how long till you run," Eli said. "Sheriff figure you keep her on a rope at night?" The knife in the big man's hand stopped moving. He slowly lifted his head. His gaze was as calm and cold as the creek water. She stays because she chooses to stay, Eli snorted. Ain't what Thorne says. He says his property will be returned, one way or another. The air went still. The name hung there, heavy and poisonous. The mountain man didn't answer. He just went back to his carving, each slice of the knife deliberate and dangerous. Eli didn't stay long after that. His laughter echoed as he rode away, fading down the trail like a rattlesnake's warning. That night, the bread she made tasted like ash in her mouth. She couldn't eat. The cabin felt too small, the silence too loud. She went outside and sat at the edge of the clearing, watching the first stars prick the darkening sky. The old hound dog that sometimes hung around the cabin padded up and laid its heavy head on her knee. Behind her, she heard the soft crunch of boots on dirt. "You thinkin' of leavin'?" he asked. His voice was quiet, just a low rumble in the dusk. She shook her head, stroking the dog's rough fur. "I don't have anywhere to go." He came and stood beside her, not too close, looking out over the valley lights that were beginning to flicker on, so small and far away. "Then stay," he said. "Stay until you do." It wasn't a command. It was an offer. A strange, quiet gentleness that unsettled her more than his anger ever could. Because for the first time, she thought she might actually want to. The days bled into weeks, and a fragile green started to push through the dirt in the small garden she'd planted. Tiny shoots of life, like little promises. Sometimes, when she was alone, she would sing. Softly, to herself. Old songs her mother used to hum while hanging laundry. She thought he was too far away to hear. But one afternoon, she finished a verse and turned, and he was standing there, just outside the cabin, leaning against a tree. Listening. He didn't say anything. When their eyes met, he looked away quick, pretending to check a loose board on the porch. But she saw it. A flicker of something in his face she couldn't name. The silence between them began to change. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full. Full of unspoken things, of biscuits and wildflowers, of a shared solitude that was slowly becoming something else. A trust being built one quiet day at a time. Then the storm came. It rolled in from the west, sudden and violent. The sky turned a bruised purple gray. Thunder cracked like a whip, echoing off the peaks. Rain came down not in drops, but in solid silver sheets. Alara rushed to latch the wooden shutters. The floor was already slick with rain blowing in through the door. Her bare feet slipped. She fell, hard, her head cracking against the leg of the table. The world went starry and blurred. But before she even hit the ground completely, he was there. He moved like lightning, catching her, his hands strong and steady under her shoulders. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing. For a moment, they were frozen there. A brilliant flash of lightning lit up the cabin, turning everything stark white and black. In that instant of pure light, she saw his face clearly. She saw the long, pale scar that ran down his jawline, and she saw the look in his eyes. The stone was gone. The coldness was gone. In its place was a raw, aching tenderness that stole her breath. He helped her to a chair, his hand lingering on her arm just a second too long. The thunder faded to a low rumble. The fire hissed and popped. The only other sound was the frantic beating of her own heart. And it wasn't beating from fear. It was something else entirely. Quieter, deeper, and much, much more dangerous. The morning after the storm, the world felt new. Sunlight dripped through the wet leaves, and the air smelled of clean earth and pine. Alara stepped outside, the damp ground cool on her bare feet. The world was washed clean. He was already at the woodpile, splitting logs. His shirt was damp with sweat, clinging to the powerful muscles in his back. The rhythm of the axe was steady and strong, like a heartbeat. He glanced up as she came out, gave a short nod, and went back to work. Something had shifted between them. The air was different, charged. Around noon, Eli came back up the trail. He brought sugar this time, and news. "Town's getting restless," he said, leaning against the porch rail, chewing on a piece of straw. "Word is, your service is about up. Sheriff's gonna be sending for you soon." Alara froze. The bowl of water in her hands trembled, sloshing over the sides. The mountain man's axe stopped mid-swing. His eyes flickered to her face, just for a second, then back to Eli. His voice was flat. "She'll go when she's ready." Eli shrugged, a smirk playing on his lips. "That ain't how the law sees it, Silas. Punishment's got a time limit. It ain't a choice." He called him Silas. The name felt strange, solid. It made him real. Silas. When Eli left, the air he left behind was thick and suffocating. The unspoken thing between them was finally out in the open. Her time was running out. That night, she couldn't sleep. She packed her few things, the worn shawl, the tin of salt, the clothes she arrived in, and placed the small bundle by the door. She sat by the dying fire, watching the embers glow and fade, just like her time on the mountain. Silas rose before dawn, as always. He saw her sitting there, awake. He saw the bundle by the door. His voice was quiet, rough. "You think they'll let you be? That Thorne will just let you live easy back there?" "They'll talk," she whispered, not looking at him. "But maybe I can find work somewhere else. I can't hide here forever." "Town breaks what it can't control," he said, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "You know that." She knew. She turned away. The old hound whined softly, pressing against her legs, sensing the tension. That afternoon, she went to the stream. She washed the flour from her apron, scrubbing until her knuckles were raw. She looked at her reflection in the clear, cold water. The woman looking back wasn't the same one who'd staggered up this mountain, bruised and broken. Her shoulders were straight. Her eyes were clear. There was a defiance in them now. The mountain hadn't broken her. It had given her space to heal. She walked back to the cabin as the sun began to bleed through the pines, painting the sky in fiery orange and red. Silas was on the porch. He was carving something small. As she got closer, she saw what it was. A bird. A small wooden bird, its wings half spread as if it was about to take flight. It was rough, but graceful. He held it out to her, not looking up from his work. "For the journey." Her throat went tight. She wanted to thank him, to say something, anything, but the words were tangled up inside her. She took the bird. Its wooden body was smooth and warm in her palm. It felt as light as truth, and as fragile as hope. That night, the wind whispered through the cabin, but neither of them slept. She lay on her cot, listening to the sound of his slow, heavy footsteps pacing back and forth on the porch. Fear and a strange, deep longing twisted together inside her until she couldn't tell them apart. When the first light of dawn touched the peaks, she rose. Her heart was a heavy stone in her chest, but her hands were steady. She tied her bundle. She lifted it onto the mule's back. He was standing right there beside her. His face was unreadable, carved from shadow and morning light. "You don't owe me anything," she whispered. He shook his head slowly. "Maybe I'm the one who owes you." She frowned, confused. "For what?" "For reminding me what mercy looks like." The words hung in the cold morning air, as fragile as smoke. The dog barked once, a sharp sound that broke the spell. She turned toward the trail, but before she could take a step, he reached out. His hand closed around her arm. His touch was light, but it held her in place. His eyes burned with a quiet, fierce light. "The town don't own you," he said, his voice low and raw. Then he let her go. She nodded, unable to speak. She mounted the mule and urged it down the slope. The sun was spilling gold across the valley below. Every step took her farther away, but the scent of wood smoke and the sound of his axe were burned into her memory. She risked one look back. He was still there, a tall, dark silhouette framed in the cabin doorway, watching her go. She thought she heard his voice on the wind, faint, almost lost in the hum of the morning. "Come back if they break you again." A tear escaped, then another, tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. She wasn't sure if he could see her smile through the tears. Down in the valley the town was waiting, with its rules and its judgment and its cruel, watchful eyes. But up on the ridge, the mountain was waiting too, silent, patient. And in her hand, the small wooden bird felt like it was ready to fly. But as she rounded the first bend, she saw something else. Dust. A small cloud of it, rising from the valley floor. Not one rider, more. And they were coming up the mountain. Fast. Her heart plummeted. They weren't waiting. They were coming for her. She spurred the mule, not down but off the path, into the thick trees, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had to warn him. She scrambled back up the path, branches whipping at her face, her lungs burning. The mule stumbled behind her. She could hear the riders now, the jingle of harnesses, the gruff sound of men's voices. They were close. She burst back into the clearing, breathless. "They're coming! Silas! They're coming now!" He was already standing on the porch, a long rifle held loosely in one hand. He hadn't been watching her leave. He'd been watching the trail. He already knew. His face was grim. "Get inside," he ordered. "Bar the door." "But now, Ilara." He used her name. For the first time he said her name. The sound of it, in his deep voice, sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. She ran inside, her hands fumbling with the heavy wooden bar, sliding it into place just as the riders broke through the tree line. There were 4 of them. The sheriff was in the lead, his face set in a tired, unhappy mask. Beside him, with a smug, satisfied look, was the preacher. And behind them, his face flushed with anger and possession, was Jebediah Thorne. He was flanked by a hired gun with cold, dead eyes. They reined in their horses just beyond the fence line. "Silas!" the sheriff called out. "Don't make this ugly. We've come for the woman." Silas didn't move from the porch. The rifle in his hand looked like a toy. "Her time's served. That was the deal." "The deal has changed," the preacher sneered, dismounting. "She has shown no remorse. She requires further correction. The town demands it." Jebediah Thorne swung down from his horse, his eyes fixed on the cabin door. "She's my property to correct," he spat. "You're harboring a fugitive mountain man, a thief." Ilara peered through a crack in the shutter. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't about the law. This was about pride. About a powerful man who couldn't stand that she had defied him. Silas's voice was dangerously calm. "She ain't property, and she ain't a fugitive. She served the sentence you gave her." "The sentence isn't over until I say it's over," Thorne snarled, taking a step toward the fence. "Now send her out, or we'll burn this shack to the ground with both of you in it." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Now, Jebediah." "Stay out of this, Sheriff. This is my family's honor at stake." Silas took a slow step forward, to the edge of the porch. "You talk about honor, Thorne? You, who cornered a woman half your size? Your honor was lost long before she ever laid a hand on you." Thorne's face went purple with rage. "You'll pay for that, you hermit freak." He looked at his hired man. "Get her." The man with the dead eyes started to move toward the cabin. There was a blur of motion. A deafening crack echoed off the mountainside. A splinter of wood flew from the fence post, inches from the gunman's head. He froze. Everyone froze. The smoke curled from the end of Silas's rifle. His voice was low, lethal. "That was a warning. The next one won't miss." The air was taut as a wire. The silence was absolute, broken only by the nervous stamping of a horse. The sheriff put his hand on his pistol. "Don't do this, Silas. You can't win." "I ain't trying to win," Silas said, his eyes never leaving Thorn. "I'm just drawing a line." Alara's heart felt like it was going to burst. He was doing this for her, this man who barely knew her, who had never spoken more than a handful of words to her. He was risking his life for her. The preacher, seeing his chance, made a different move. He circled around the side of the cabin, toward the small shuttered window of the root cellar. He was quiet, thinking no one saw him. But Alara saw him. She looked around the cabin, frantic. There was an old, heavy iron poker by the fireplace. Without a second thought, she grabbed it. She crept to the back of the cabin, listening. She could hear the preacher fumbling with the latch on the outside. Thorn started shouting again, trying to distract Silas. "You think you're some kind of hero? You're nothing! A washed-up lawman who ran away with his tail between his legs." A lawman? The twist of information hit her hard. This quiet mountain man. He used to be one of them. The cellar latch scraped open. Alara held her breath, flattening herself against the wall. The preacher's head and shoulders appeared in the opening, his face greedy as he tried to peer into the dark cabin. She didn't hesitate. She swung the heavy iron poker with all the strength she had. There was a sickening thud, and the preacher crumpled without a sound. Outside, the crack of another rifle shot split the air. The second shot came from the trees. Thorn's hired gun staggered, clutching his shoulder, his gun falling into the dust. Eli. Eli burst from the cover of the woods, a hunting rifle in his hands. "Sheriff!" he yelled, his voice cracking. "Thorn's lying! The whole town knows he's a brute! They just are too scared to say it! Don't let him do this!" Thorn, enraged, spun around and drew his own pistol, firing wildly into the trees toward Eli. That was the moment Silas needed. He vaulted over the porch rail, moving with a speed that defied his size. He hit Thorn with the force of a battering ram. The two men went down in a tangle of limbs, wrestling in the dirt for Thorn's gun. The sheriff, stunned, finally acted. "That's enough! Both of you!" He fired his pistol into the air, but it was too late. Thorn was crazed. He brought the butt of his pistol up, cracking it against Silas's temple. Silas grunted, dazed for a second, and in that second, Thorn scrambled to his feet, the gun back in his hand. He pointed it directly at Silas, who was struggling to get up. "It's over, freak," Thorn hissed, his finger tightening on the trigger. "No!" Alara screamed. She threw open the cabin door and ran out, putting herself between Thorn and Silas. She stood there unarmed, trembling but resolute, her eyes blazing with a fire Thorn had never seen before. "You want to shoot someone," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "You shoot me, but you will not touch him." Thorn stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. For a moment, no one moved. The entire world seemed to hold its breath. The sheriff had his gun drawn, pointed at Thorn. "Put it down, Jebediah. It's over." "She's the one who started this," he screamed, his voice cracking. "She dishonored me." "She defended herself," Silas roared from the ground. "Just like my sister did, right before you put her in the ground." The secret exploded into the clearing, more powerful than any gunshot. The sheriff's face went white. Eli stared, his mouth open. Thorn froze, his face crumbling. The gun in his hand wavered. Silas struggled to his feet, blood trickling from his temple. "I was the law back then, and I couldn't protect her from you, so I left. I came up here so I'd never have to see your face again. But it seems some devils follow you, no matter how high you climb." The whole ugly story was laid bare. The town's dark secret, Silas's exile, Alara's punishment. It was all connected. It was all about this one cruel, powerful man. Thorn looked from Silas's face, filled with righteous fury, to Alara's, filled with unbreakable defiance. and he broke. He let out a strangled cry, turned, and ran. He scrambled onto his horse and galloped madly down the trail, a coward fleeing the truth. The hired gun was groaning on the ground. The preacher was still unconscious in the cellar. The sheriff slowly lowered his pistol, his face full of a deep, weary shame. He looked at Silas, then at Alara. "He won't be back," the sheriff said quietly. "And the town will know the truth now, thanks to the boy." He nodded toward Eli, who was walking shakily out of the woods. "As far as the law is concerned, this matter is closed. You two." He paused, looking at the cabin, at the mountain rising behind them. "You're free to go, or to stay. No one will bother you again." He tipped his hat, a gesture of respect Silas hadn't seen in years. Then he turned his horse, and leading the others, rode slowly back down the mountain, leaving Justice in his wake. As the sound of the hooves faded, a profound silence settled over the clearing. It was finally over. Alara stood there, trembling, as the adrenaline drained away, leaving her weak. Silas took a step toward her. He reached out, his rough hand gently touching the fading bruise on her cheek. "You didn't have to do that," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I did," she whispered, tears finally starting to fall. "You reminded me what mercy looks like. I had to remind you what it feels like to have someone stand with you." He looked at her, and for the first time, all the sadness in his eyes was gone, replaced by a light she had never seen before. He pulled her into his arms, and she buried her face in his chest, breathing in the scent of pine and sweat and safety. The mountain had taken two broken people and made them whole. Punishment had become grace. Exile had become home. The sun began to set, painting the sky in colors of forgiveness and hope. They stood there for a long time, holding on to each other, while the mountain kept its watch, its secrets finally at peace. What do you think their future holds? If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more tales from the wild heart of the world.